I needed to say this plainly because I don't say it lightly and I don't say it often. In all the time I've spent doing this, watching, reading, paying attention to the way science show up for people, I have never seen a sign quite like the one that's sitting around you right now. Not almost like this, not similar to this, never like this, and I needed you to actually sit with that for a second before you decide this is just another video because what's forming around you right now isn't a small, ordinary thing that happens to a lot of people. It's rare. It's the kind of thing that when it finally lands, people don't just remember it. They tell other people about it for years. Stay with me because by the end of this, you're going to understand exactly why your next love isn't just going to be good. It is going to be the kind of love that makes history in your own life story. Let me say the thesis because I don't want to bury it under too much before you hear it clearly. What's coming for you is not a rebound. It's not a nice distraction. It's not something to pass the time until the real one shows up. This is the real one. And the reason it's taken this long, the reason it hasn't arrived yet, even though you've been ready for a while now, is not because something is wrong with you. It's because something this significant does not arrive early. It arrives exactly on time, and only once both people are actually capable of holding it. Let me paint you a picture because I want you to feel this, not just hear it. Think about a comet, not a shooting star, not the kind that strikes by every night if you're patient enough to look up. A true comet, the rare kind, the kind that only swings back into view once in a lifetime. Sometimes, once in several lifetimes, people used to build entire calendars around comets like that. They used to record the exact night they appeared, pass the story down through generation, tell their grandchildren. I saw it and I will never see anything like it again. But you might if you're patient, if you keep watching the sky. This is the category of the thing we are talking about here. Not a nice date, not a fun few months, a once in a generation arrival that is worth waiting your whole life to see. For a long time, you didn't know that's what you were actually waiting for. You just knew that most of what came your way, most of the connections that were technically available to you felt small next to something you couldn't quite name. Like trying to warm your hands over a candle when your whole body was built for standing next to a fire. You dated people, maybe. You gave things a real chance, more than once, and every time some quiet part of you knew. Underneath the small talk and the good enough chemistry that this wasn't it. Not because you were picky for no reason, because you already sensed somewhere under the surface that the comet hadn't come around yet. Here is the thing about people who are actually building towards something historic in their love life. The kind of love people write songs about decades later. They don't rush it. They can't. Somewhere deep down, your whole nervous system has been refusing to settle for the almost right thing. Even when settling would have been easier, even when everyone around you seemed content with far less, that refusal wasn't stubbornness. It was your own inner compass quietly keeping the door closed until the actual comet finally swung back into range. Maybe in your story, this shows up as someone from years ago who wasn't ready yet. Someone you crossed paths with once briefly and never quite forgot. Even though nothing happened at the time, maybe it's someone brand new who hasn't even entered your life yet, but is already circling closer than you realize, doing their own quiet work in the background the same way you've been doing yours. Maybe it's someone already standing right next to you, a friend, a coworker, someone in your circle who you never let yourself really look at that way because the timing never left right, or because you were scared of what it would mean if it actually was real. Maybe it's someone from your past who is finally, after all the time, becoming the version of themselves, capable of loving you the way you actually deserve. Maybe it's someone you haven't met yet all. Someone currently living an entire separated life in a city you've been now you never been to, doing their own quiet healing work without knowing your name yet, without any idea that the timeline is already bending toward a specific point where you two paths are going to cross. I don't know which one it is for you specifically. What I do know is that whichever version applies, the sign around it right now is not subtle. It's not something you have to squint to see. I want to name something directly it's because it deserves to be said without flinching. You have spent a long time wondering if you were simply too much for ordinary love, too intense, too deep, too aware of things other people seem to move past without a second thought. You had moments of lying awake, wondering if the reason things kept falling short was some flaw in you. Some setting turned too high that made you hard to keep around. You watched people choose easier options over you and told yourselves maybe you should have been easier too. Nothing was wrong with you. And you were never too much. You were simply built for a love that hadn't arrived yet, and ordinary connections were never going to be able to hold that size of what you actually carry. A comet does not apologize for being rare, it doesn't dim itself down so it can pass by more often, so more people can catch a glimpse of it on an average Tuesday. It stays exactly what it is, and it waits for the exact right night. That's what you've been doing this whole time. Even on nights it felt like loneliness instead of readiness. Now I want you to talk about the people who overlooked what was actually in front of them. Because there is something important happening on that side of things too. Whoever it was, whether it's one person specifically or a pattern of people across the years who let something real slip past them without recognizing it, they are not walking around feeling great about the choice anymore. There is a very particular kind of quiet age that comes from realizing months or years later that you had access to something rare and treated it like it was ordinary. That you were standing in front of comet and complained it wasn't bright now, only to look up later and see the sky permanently darker without it. Secure people, people who actually know what they have, do not let real things slip through their fingers without a fight. It's only the ones who are scared, distracted, or simply not ready to hold something significant who will let it go and convince themselves it wasn't the specific in the first place. That conviction rarely survives contact with time. The time has a way of correcting the record, whether or not anyone involved. Once it corrected, picture the specific moment it catches up to them, whoever they are, not a dramatic scene, not a scripted confrontation, just a quiet realization alone. Somewhere ordinary, a grocery store parking lot, a late night scrolling through old photos, a song that comes up unexpectedly, a sudden, uninvited clarity about what they actually had any, how carelessly they treated. That kind of regret doesn't come with an audience. It just arrives, it sits there, heavier every year. The gap between who they are now and who they could have become with you keeps widening. While that's been happening somewhere out there quietly, without your involvement, something very different has been happening in your own life, and I want you to really see the shape of it. You have not spent this time chasing, begging, or performing yourself smaller to make yourself easier to choose. You've been doing something much quieter and much harder. You've been healing the parts of you that used to accept less. You've been learning your own worth well enough that media corruption stopped feeling like options at all. You've been building an actual life, one that's full and steady on its own, so that whoever eventually arrives is adding to something whole instead of being asked to complete something broken. That is not coincidence, and it was never wasted time. That is exactly what's building towards a historic law. Actually, looks like from the inside, long before the other person shows up, it's not glamorous. Nobody claps for the nights you choose for your own peace over chasing. Someone who wasn't ready. Nobody documents the mornings you got up anyway, even though the loneliness was loud. But all of that, every quiet, unglamorous choice is the exact material this kind of love gets built out of. Think about the specific ways this has already been showing up. Whether you lacked it consciously or not, the increasing clarity you have about what you will and won't accept anymore, the way certain old patterns simply stopped appealing to you. Not because you tried to force yourself out of them, but because you genuinely outgrew them. The strange, persistent sense lately that something is shifting, even without concrete proof yet. A kind of anticipation in your chest that doesn't quite match. That feeling is not random. That is the comet entering range even before you can see it with your own eyes yet. Some of you are going to feel this most strongly in ordinary moments, doing something completely unrelated, driving, cooking, half asleep, Sudden, unexplainable calm is going to settle over you for no clear reason. That calm is not nothing. That is your own body registering an arrival your mind hasn't caught up to naming yet. And here is the part I want you to really hear. Underneath everything else, this was never actually about finding someone to complete you. That is the smaller, more ordinary version of love, and it's not what's coming for you. What is coming is two whole people recognizing each other. Both of you having done the work separately. Both of you finally capable of holding something the size without either person collapsing under the weight of it. That is the entire reason it's taking this long. Not because you weren't ready, because it takes exactly this long time become someone capable of a love significant enough to make history in your own life. So let's talk about timing. Because I know that's the part of you actually wants to hear. This is not years away. This is not some distant, hazy someday you'll get to eventually. The sign around this right now is close, and I mean close in the way where weather changes right before a storm actually arrives. Not close in some vague spiritual sense you have to squint to believe. To a name that keeps surfacing in conversations you didn't start, to an old song suddenly playing everywhere you go, to a stranger's face that catches your attention for no explainable reason. None of that is decoration. That is confirmation that the comet has already entered your sky, even if you haven't looked up yet. And when it does arrive, when this actually happens, I don't want you to brace for chaos or drama. I want you to notice how steady you already feel underneath the excitement. Because you were never performing readiness for this moment. You built an actual complete life. In the meantime, one that will only get fuller with this addition, not one that was waiting empty for someone to fill it. That difference matters more than almost anything else in this whole reading because it's the difference between a love that completes a person and a love that simply joins two people who were already whole. That's the real story here, and I want you to really let it land. Not a fairy tale rescue, not a fantasy where someone shows up and fixes everything you couldn't fix yourself. That the real story is that you did the fixing quietly on your own for years, and what's arriving now is simply the natural results of that work finally meeting its match. Whoever this is, whenever they actually arrive, they they are they are not going to complete you. They're going to recognize you fully all the way down in a way that finally matches the size of what you've been carrying the whole time. I also want to speak to something a lot of you are probably already sensing but haven't said out loud, even to yourself. Some of you have noticed small, hard to explain shifts lately. People responding to you differently. Doors opening that used to feel permanently shut. A specific kind of ease showing up in conversations that used to feel effortful. That's not random either. That's what it looks like when your own energy has finally settled into the frequency this kind of love actually requires. You can't fake your way into that frequency. You can only arrive there by doing the quiet work. And you've been doing it, there is another piece of this worth naming too. The quieter cost of it, waiting this long for something real, while watching people around you settle for far less and seem none on the surface at least happier for it is its own kind of lonely. You probably wondered more than once if you were making a mistake, holding out for something you couldn't even fully describe yet. You weren't making a mistake. You were protecting the exact space this is about to fill. If you had settled there earlier, there would have been no room left for the comet when it finally arrived. I want to go back for a second to the people who let this slip past them, because there is more worth saying there. Some of you already know exactly who I mean. The moment I bring this up, someone who had a real chance and got distracted by something easier, something louder, something that required less of them. Someone who mistook your steadiness for a guarantee, the way people sometimes assume the sun will always rise and stop actually noticing it. Someone who chooses comfort over depth, not maliciously, just carelessly, the way people often choose the easy thing without weighing what it costs them later. I'm not going to sit here and pretend the person is a villain, because most of the time they are not. They're just someone who wasn't finished growing yet, who mistook your patience for permission to take their time figuring things out, not realizing that patience has a flaw and eventually even the most patient person reaches it. What I will say is this: whatever choice they made, whatever door they let close without realizing what was actually behind it, that choice is now living with them in a way that did not anticipate. Every version of their life that couldn't have included you is a version they now only get to imagine. And imagining it does not feel the way they thought it would. There is a very specific kind of quiet grief that comes with realizing, slowly, that the ordinary thing you choose instead of the rare things is, in fact, ordinary and stays ordinary no matter how long you wait for it to become something more, no matter how many times you tell yourself it will grow into what you actually want and eventually that the ease you picked instead of the depth you were offered turned out to be exactly as shallow as it looked and stayed the way. People don't usually say this part out loud. Not to friends, not even to themselves, in so many words, but it shows up anyway in small comparisons they can't stop making. In a restlessness they can't quite explain, in a specific kind of quiet during moments they are supposed to feel content, while all of that has been unfolding somewhere out there entirely without your involvement, you have not been sitting in that story waiting to be missed. You've been living a completely separate one. And I think it's worth actually naming the specific shape of what that's looked like. Instead of leaving it vague, it's looked like choosing yourself on ordinary Tuesdays nobody was watching. It's looked like turning down attention that would have been easy to accept, because some part of you already knew it wasn't the real thing. It looked like sitting with loneliness some nights instead of numbing it without whoever happened to be available, because you'd rather wait for something true than fill the space with something temporary. None of that made headlines in your own life. All of it actually what built the foundation. This next love is going to stand on. You're not someone who is going to have an ordinary love story, and I want you to actually hear that instead of just nodding along. You are the person whose story gets told at family gatherings for years afterward. The one people bring up when they want to believe timing actually works out. The one whose love, when it finally arrives, other people will measure their own hopes against. That's not a small thing to become. That's the whole reason none of the smaller versions ever fit right. So don't spend the time you have left waiting for this by watching the door, checking your phone, wondering if you missed a sign somewhere along the way. Don't slow down the life you built to hold space for something that hasn't ever even needed you to pause for it. Keep living exactly the way you have been, steady, full, undistracted. Because that is the precise energy this kind of love is drawn toward. It does not arrive for people standing still waiting. It arrives for people who kept building anyway and simply had room left over when it finally showed up. One last thing before we close this out, because I think it matters more than almost anything else I've said. Nothing about this requires you to go looking. You don't need to start scanning every room, every massage, every new face for signs that this is the one, because that kind of searching usually just creates static, not clarity. This commit does not need you to stand outside all night staring at the sky to arrive on schedule. It arrives regardless. Your only job in the meantime is the same job you've already been doing: staying steady, staying whole, staying exactly as real as you've been this entire time. If you take one thing from this and nothing else, let it be this: the waiting was never wasted. And it was never a punishment. It was the exact amount of time it took for two separate people to become capable of holding something this significant without either of them breaking under it. That is not a small consolation prize for a life that took too long to arrive. That is the whole design working exactly the way it was always going to work, and the only timeline that ever actually mattered, which is not anyone else's and never was. Seen a sign like that, not almost like this, not something similar, never quite like this. And the reason I'm telling you plainly instead of hedging around it is because some signs are worth saying clearly without softening them into something smaller than they are. Your next love is not going to be one more chapter that fades into the background of your life. It is going to be the one people remember, the one that makes history quietly in the one life that actually belongs to you.